Welcome to the lecture. So previously we discussed identifying risks and then analyzing risks, in which we assigned scores to different types of risks that we identified. In the risk evaluation phase, which we are going to discuss now, we want to decide which risks we want to focus on first. As previously discussed, not all risks are equal, and since now we have the risk scores as well, we can proceed with prioritizing risks so that we can know where to focus our attention in terms of which risks we are going to handle as a priority and which ones we can put on the back burner. Risk evaluation is basically the decision-making phase. Imagine that you have identified 50 plus risks. Now clearly you cannot handle all 50 risks simultaneously, or you even want to address all of those 50 risks. Therefore, we need a mechanism to identify the top risks where we can focus our energy and time. So one of the main targets of the risk evaluation phase is to classify risk broadly into different categories. For example, it could be critical versus non-critical. It could be medium, low, high. So basically we want sort of broad categories for the different risks that we have identified. Now, the proper way to make sense of and use the risk scores that we previously calculated is by using something which we call as the risk matrix. It is a very important concept and very well known and widely used in the risk industry. Essentially, it allows us to nicely plot and visualize risks and, more importantly, to prioritize them. So let's have a look at an actual risk matrix. Please don't consider it as very complex. It looks to be complex, but in fact, the logic behind it is really simple, and I'm going to break it down step by step so that you can understand it perfectly well. Now, first things first. So if you recall, we discussed that likelihood can be scored anywhere from 1, which is rare, unlikely 2, moderate 3, likely 4, and almost certain as 5 score. And this is exactly what we have here. Moving on, for the impact, we once again had the same thing. Impact can be negligible, in which case we assign it 1, minor 2, moderate 3, major 4, and catastrophic 5. So essentially, on the y-axis we have plotted likelihood, and on the x-axis we have the impact. Now one more thing, this is a 5 by 5 risk matrix because we have 5 columns and 5 rows. Now sometimes some organizations also use a more simplified one, which is a 3 by 3, in which case you will have just 3 columns and 3 rows. But just to clarify the concept a bit more, it's always nice to use sort of like the standard 5 by 5 risk matrix. So once again we had the likelihood here and impact here. Now let's pay attention on how these scores have been calculated. So for example, for this particular box, so likelihood multiplied by impact, the risk score is 5. Similarly for this one, for example, 4 multiplied by 1, 4. How about this one? So this would be 4 multiplied by 3, 12. Okay, so that's how we have assigned these scores. So for example, for this one, it would be 4 multiplied by 5 is equal to 20. So just think of it that we have actually listed down all the different combinations of these values. So 1 multiplied by 1, 1 multiplied by 2, 1 multiplied by 3, and so on. But logically speaking, what do these values actually represent? So generally we already know that low risk scores generally represent a low risk and high risk scores represent a critical risk. And that's exactly what this color coding and this whole matrix is all about. So for example, here is the legend. So now what we are saying is that any risk score, the final score, likelihood multiplied by impact, if it ranges from 1 to 5, consider it as a low risk and mark it as green. So if you focus on these boxes, so these 4, these 2 and these, all of the risk values, the final value are all between 1 and 5. For example, this is 4, this is 3, this is 4, this is 4, this is 3. So at the end we can say that all of these combinations, so any risk, so for example we previously identified different risks. Let me just quickly go to that sheet. So for example, if I go back to the risk register in which we listed down all the different risks with unique IDs, and then we calculated the risk score, which was likelihood multiplied by impact. So for example, for this one, risk 001, unauthorized access to HR records, the likelihood was 3, impact was 4, so we said that the risk score would be 12. Now if you look at this risk matrix, 12 is basically medium. Now if we go to the legend, we can see that medium risk is anything between 6 to 14. So this risk score lies within this broad category or this range. So we will classify it as a medium risk. The issue is that imagine you have 50 different risks, right? And you'll have so many different values 1, 3, 5, 7, 20, 17, 22, all of these combinations. You don't want to have so many different categories. So what you do is that you lump these different scores in different groups. So for scores from 1 to 25, instead of having 25 different categories, we'll just have 3 different categories. If the score ranges from 1 to 5, we'll say it's low risk.
If it is from 6 to 14,
We'll say it's medium risk. If it is from 15 to 25, we'll say
critical risk.
red. That's it. That's what the risk matrix is all about. If you notice, all of these scores which are from 15 to 25, these are red, which means they are critical. All of these yellow ones are medium, and their values are always between 6 to 14. And all of these low ones, they have values between 1 and 5. That's what it's all about. So you pick a risk from here, for example this one, you check what was the risk score, you come here and you check what's the category that it belongs to. So in this case 12 is between 6 to 14, so we'll classify the risk level as medium or yellow. Now go to this risk, right? So the risk score was 20. So if you look here, 20 is
Critical risk.
okay. You can also look at here, for example, this combination 20, it's a critical risk. So we'll classify it as critical risk. Similarly, if you look at this risk, value 6 would be somewhere between here. So it's a medium risk. For the last one, once again, the risk score is 20, which means it's a critical risk. So that's all what we have done. Instead of having multiple different categories for every different risk score, we put them in groups based on low risk, medium risk, or
Critical risk.
and that's the whole story. There's one more interesting thing. Now let's say an organization decides that instead of using these brackets 1 to 5, 6 to 14, 15 to 25, they want to change it. Let's say they say that from 6 to 19, we'll consider it as medium, and only the risks from 20 to 25, we're going to consider those as critical. So in that case, you'll need to update this risk matrix a little bit. So for example, this critical would now become medium. So it will be medium but with the value 15. Similarly, this one would also change and this one would also change. The value would obviously be 16 here and 15 here. So only the values from 20 to 25 remain as critical, 20, 25, 20. So in this case, what the organization has actually done is that they've moved critical risks to just these very, very high scores, which means that they're considering risk scores up to 19 as medium level risks. So it is entirely up to the organization to decide what brackets they want to use. It depends on the industry, the organization's circumstances, and lots of different factors. But this is the general idea. We first create this risk register document, we assign risk scores, then we create the risk matrix, and then we decide what are the different brackets that we want. So for example, they may decide to change the low risk from 1 to 9, for example, and then 10 to 19, 20 to 25, whatever any organization wants. If anything changes, you'll have to update the actual risk register and then reflect the final values as the correct range in the risk level. And that's the key concept.